Okay. Thank you all for joining today. We have a great topic for you today. I think we want to make sure that what we're trying to do is we're trying to add value as your partner. I think these are webinars that are focused on our install base. We have a topic today that is a rather detailed one, and we've got a great presentation for you. We've also are expecting a lot of questions, so please understand that this is a detailed discussion. We're going to ask that you record your questions in the chat, because we do want to, should we need to either have a follow-up, or we have a separate Q&A session, or a way to document all the questions. I guess we want to make sure we capture them. So appreciate your help, your assistance with that. So to start off with, we're going to be, my name is Bob Black. I'm the division vice president for the multi-industry division, which is the division that at Action that sells and implements and services the Acumatica product. Tony Lanzer is our lead software engineer in our division. He's completely focused in the Acumatica space. And I know this is an animated picture of Tony, but it's surprising how much it really looks like him. So kudos to wherever you got that from, Tony. Nice job. We've got just a couple slides that we want to talk about, a few things related to being an Acumatica customer, and a little bit about Action. But then we're going to get right to the meat of the topic here and turn it over to Tony very, very quickly. Just want to kind of mention that we've got support options. Acumatica has support, Action has support. If you're interested in getting some more enhanced support for Acumatica, we'd love to work with you. We could have a sales rep talk to you about enhancing your Acumatica support as well. But we always want to make sure that we're part of the conversation. We don't want anyone not to call us when they have help. The last thing that we want is someone to try and figure something out and get frustrated and spend waste time where we could help out with answering questions for you. Always want to remind people about the community. It's a great location to spend some time. It does have forums. It has product ideas. It has news and announcements. So there's a lot going on out there. It's also a way to ask questions. Is anybody else having this similar problem that I'm having? Is also a great place for that. Product life cycle. We're now in the 22R1 release. As you can see, 20R2 is about to expire in July. So once you're behind on a release, then there is an additional amount added to your renewal. We want to avoid that. We want to keep you updated and keep you on the current release. I'll keep you with all the new current feature function that's in Acumatica. Okay, that's all the slides outside of our topic today. As I said, this is it's a very detailed topic. I think that there's going to be a lot of questions, and Acumatica, part of that community site, is training, and they do talk, they give you the ability to train in different areas of Acumatica. One of those is the software engineering side of things, the application development side of things. I think what we're going to show you today are some of the trial by error, when we find things that didn't work with the way we expected to. I think that's what we're trying to share with you today. So this is some of our real world challenges, trying to help you, anyone who's doing customizations, to avoid the same challenges we run into. There's a number of videos out there that I think some are done by Doug Johnson from Acumatica. He's one of the people who does a lot of the presentations for Acumatica. And they kind of lead you down the path with report changes, workflow changes that wind up going into a customization. There's some low code and no code options out there. Acumatica has kind of taken us all down a path that talks about ways to tailor and modify and customize Acumatica, and I think that's part of what we're trying to get ahead of as your partner, and trying to work with you to make sure that that some of the things that we've run into, we want to make sure that that you're aware of. You know, that they're also at the same time, you know, working on ways to keep everybody current. And, you know, how customizations are related to that is also part of one of the topics we're going to address here today. With that, again, feel free to send us questions in. We're going to turn it over to Tony, and we just got a couple slides here of some bullet points, and we're kind of going to go step by step through these different areas of concern and challenges that we're working with. So I'm going to stop sharing so that Tony can share, because I think he may want to jump into a customization or two as we're going through this.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, this is Tony Lanzer. Thanks for the introduction. And definitely, we're going to cover some of what Bob preluded to. I'm going to just share my screen so that I can hop between a couple different windows. Start with the bullet points that Bob had open. So just say that the main purpose of this presentation is best practices. So over time, as Bob mentioned, we've developed some best practices for creating customizations for Acumatica through trial, error, client issues, etc. And we've come up with a set of them that I think, well, that we ourselves now use, and we wanted to share with you to help us both out. Now, the purpose, I'm going to go over the purpose for some of these, which includes these areas of concern that are on the screen. So, right here. Slow. Okay. So a large area of concern is losing changes, right? So you may or may not have run into this problem in the past where all of a sudden customization changes you made aren't there anymore. The feature's missing. What happened? There's some popular causes for that I'll go over. Another thing that often happens is a customization that you may have packaged and published all of a sudden becomes unpublished and the feature's missing. Another often occurring issue is tenants that are conflicting. If you have multiple tenants set up and you have different customizations between different tenants and such, those can conflict as well and affect each other. And I'll go over that. So losing changes. One thing that can cause that is that if you have customizations that aren't packaged, and by package, I mean they aren't inside a custom project, a customization project. Let me open an Acumatica screen for you for a second. And this is just a local site that I have of, I think it's version 21R2. So I'm going to open a customization. Oh, that it's sitting for too long. Open a customization and just show you where I'm going with this. So if you create a new customization or modify an existing one, you'll see a list on the left here of all the types of customizations you can make in Acumatica. Some of them are code extensions, such as screens, code, database scripts. Some of them are the low code, no code type of customizations that are code is not required, which is most of the other ones listed here. Now, when I say a reason for losing changes is because they're not packaged, it's because one of these changes that you've made that's listed here is not packaged. Then that includes low code, no code changes. So if you're creating generic inquiries, if you're creating dashboards or modifying dashboards, if you're not packaging those, there is a risk of losing those changes that you've made, those customizations you made. So, and I'm going to go in more into that, but that is one way to not lose your changes, is to package everything, all these types that are listed here. Let me go back. Now, interesting enough, another reason for losing changes is actually packaged customizations. And what I mean by that is that after you've packaged something, in this case, this is a good example, it's the sales demo dashboard. It comes with sales demo installation that many of you have probably looked at and even modified for your own purposes. So you'll see inside here, there's 25 dashboards that are inside here that got deployed and other things. Sitemap entries, GIs, etc. So when I say a reason for losing changes is because it's packaged, is because let's say, for example, you were to modify one of these GIs. Let's just take one, for example, production orders. So inside Acumatica, for that GI, if let's say, for example, you add a column, if you don't update the package with that change and you redeploy that package, your change will be overwritten with the package version. Packages are not updated automatically. So when you do create these packages, you need to keep them updated. Now, and I'll talk more about how to do that in a minute. Presentation. So no backup. Not have. Let me back up. No pun intended. So all the customizations that are created, packaged or not, are stored in the same database. All code, all data is stored in a single database for Acumatica. Now, we recommend any code, any customizations, low code or no code, be backed up. What that could mean is a database backup. And if you're on SaaS, Acumatica does that for you up to a few days in the past. And I believe they also have a backup service that you can get a more reliable daily backup for a fee. But that's important to have in case something crashes, God forbid, and you need to restore the entire instance from backup. So you need to make sure that database backup exists, because if it doesn't, and changes in customizations, because that's what we're talking about right now, if changes in customizations were made and you lose the database, for example, those customizations are lost too. So along with the database backup, we recommend backing up the actual customization itself. So at Action, what we do is we have a code repository. If you've done coding before, I'm sure you're familiar with that means. It includes, you know, checking code in and out, versioning, etc. So we'll keep our code and customizations in there so that at any time, if we need to, if a change was lost, we can pull it out of the repository and reapply it. So that's number 3. A reason for losing changes is you made the change and something happens and you can't go back to it because it wasn't saved outside of Acumatica. Okay, another big area of concern, unpublished customizations. So as I said, all of a sudden, possibly you realize one of your customizations becomes unpublished and you don't know why. No one that you know of unpublished it manually. So some causes of that are actually publishing customizations or multi-tenant scenarios. And I'll talk about that more. Bring up the other screen. Sorry, I lost it for a second. Okay. So let's say this is unchecked and this is checked. If I publish right now, even though this is already published, they are both already published. If I publish right now, this is going to unpublish this one and keep this one published. So when you publish, you always have to be aware of both of these checkboxes. As well as when I also mentioned the multi-tenant scenario. So this is a site where I don't have multi-tenants. But if I did, what happens is when you publish in one tenant, it will, if you have different customizations published in other tenants, they will be unpublished. There's some complexities there that you have to be aware of if you're creating and publishing these yourself. And continuing with tenants that are conflicting when you have multiple tenants set up. Another more causes around tenants can be, and I'll talk more about this in a minute too, is if you have coupled environments. What I mean by that is if you have multiple tenants set up and aren't aware how they affect each other, because they're and all the tenants you have set up are set up in the exact same database. So anything you do to one is going to affect the other in some ways. And tenant-specific customizations, again, I mentioned this for a second, but if you have a customization and then you only intend to deploy it to one tenant but you have many, there are consequences to that. If you don't write that customization with tenant-dependent logic, for example, it could affect all customizations. And I'll explain that a little bit in a minute. Okay, so these are all the areas that brought us to where we are, and we developed a group of best practices to try to solve this. Now, yeah, let's move on. Let me get rid of this pointer, sorry. can move on. All right. So what are our best practices? We're going to talk about packaging customizations, backing them up, isolating the environments, publishing the customizations, and some naming convention and monitoring things that I'm going to talk about. All right, so packaging. Now, our first recommendation to you as our client is if you've created customization, you're not sure what needs to be packaged, or you're not sure if what you're doing is a low code or code extension or what it is to come to us and talk to us. So our first recommendation is that you involve us to create that extension, that customization, even if it's a GI, even if it's scenario, dashboard change, etc. If you're not sure how it's going to affect the application, talk to us. But for packaging, like I said, our best practice and what we're recommending, what we do ourselves and we also recommend to clients, is that all types of customizations that were in that list, in the customization list I showed you, should be packaged. That includes code extensions, actual code, and low no code customizations, GIs, reports, everything. And let me go back to the screen. Sorry, flipping back a second. No code updates. All right. So let me just open the editor again, where you see all the different types. So all of like I said, all of these changes we recommend the package so they can be tracked, right? So if anything were to happen, like I mentioned previously, and those changes were lost, we can always pull the previous saved version of that package and reapply it, and the changes should be there as long as they were saved. Now, I mentioned for a minute that one reason of losing changes is that you're actually publishing something. So like I said, if you've modified, for example, one of these GIs, and then you publish this customization, the change you just made will be lost. And that's important because we often run into this issue with clients that have, and this is a very good example again of the dashboards. A lot of clients like these dashboards that are included, but they want to tweak them a bit for their needs. However, if all of a sudden this dashboard gets redeployed, the changes they've done are lost. And the only way we could pull those back is to restore the entire database. And likely you don't want to do that because there's transactional data and such that has been added since then. So you may have to recreate those changes again. To solve that, unfortunately, it's a bit of a manual and tedious process, but if you know you're making changes, in this case to a dashboard, you go into the package, which it's included in, and you click reload from database. What that'll do is obviously it'll pull your changes that you've made since the package was created into the package. And those recent changes will then be saved in the package. You should also then, of course, save that package somewhere. On the action side, what we'll do is we'll back up the package, like I said, into a repository. So if the package was updated, we'll update it, save it off, and then if it's lost, we have a version of it. But if you're doing it as a client, you need to keep this in mind, that you need to keep any packages updated that you're creating and modifying. So it's a catch-22, right? If you don't put customizations in packages inside projects, they could be lost because if there's an issue with the app or the database, those changes aren't packaged, so they could be lost. But if you do, you have to make sure you update those packages so they also won't be lost in case you republish the package. Okay. And yeah, so that's updates, tenant-specific features, right. Let me ask Bob. Bob, do you think it's okay to bring up a client site that I was using yesterday? Can't hear you, Bob.
I was on mute. I apologize. Yes, I think that's okay, Tony.
Okay. Sorry, I just want to bring up a site that has multiple tenants. I didn't set one up myself, unfortunately, locally. And just hold on a second while this is loading. Okay. Same screen. I think this is version 22.1, but it should be the same pretty much. And right. So you'll see this instance has 5 different tenants set up. Now, I've talked about the conflict between having multiple tenants already, but sorry, let me go back to the slide. And so the issue for packaging for multiple tenants, I spoke about just a minute or two, but the reason tenants get in the way sometimes are because the user or the customization writer doesn't realize that customizations, although you intend to make them and publish them to a single tenant, they affect multiple tenants because it's all in the same database. And I'll talk about isolating environments in a couple of minutes, but for now, basically, I'm saying that you need to be careful when you're packaging, that if you're doing any code extensions, especially, that code, whether you know it or not, is deployed to all tenants. If you publish from one tenant, that library, that DLL that gets created and deployed is live on a single site. So there is some effect, as well as anything in the database. The database is shared between tenants as well. So as a practice action, if we do need to make something tenant specific, we'll actually code it so that it applies to only one tenant. We prefer to write tenants that are independent, but if we have to write, customizations that are tenant independent, but if we really need to, we need to put logic in the customization so that it applies to only the particular or specific tenants it was meant for. Otherwise, it may affect the others, even though you may think that, for example, you're checking off one or two of these to deploy to only one or two tenants, it will affect all of them. Now, there's a difference. What the other, sorry, I'll just open this one. So what I mentioned, the actual code extensions like data screens, data access, code, database scripts, those will affect all tenants regardless. So they need to be specifically written for the tenants you expect them to work for. All of the rest are considered low code, no code changes. We talked about business events, GIs, workflows, etc. Those are low code, no code changes, and they actually only affect a specific tenant. So they're the opposite. So if you need those to cross tenants, you need to specifically deploy those, publish those, package them appropriately so that they apply to those specific tenants that you request or that are desirable. Okay. Backup, talk about again. Talked a little bit about the importance of backup and that everything, all customizations you make are in a single database. That is backed up in the database if you ever need that to be restored. As a SaaS customer, Acumatica can restore that for you. But if it was only a customization issue that you need to restore, know that there's no way to only restore customizations from the database. You have to restore the entire database, which includes transactional data and such. So it's best to have the customizations saved outside of Acumatica so you can reapply them if you need to. And versioning, I talked about a little bit. It's a great idea to not only save them, back them up, your customizations, but to version them so you can go back and forth between changes if you need to. Let's say you made a few changes and then you made some drastic changes to something else that completely broke it. How are you going to go back to the version that worked? Without versioning, you can't. Unless you manually backed it up or you saved it off somehow, you can't go backwards. So we also at Action version everything appropriately in our repository based on that particular project and also according to that particular Acumatica version. All right, let's talk about environments a bit. So I discussed the conflicts with tenants and such, and there's a lot of complexities around that, packaging and publishing and storage, that even though Acumatica recommends creating multiple tenants for testing, for demos, and other purposes. We've run into so many issues and conflicts across tenants because that they're not independent. At Action, we recommend you think about isolating those as different instances instead of creating separate tenants in the same instance. Now, it may require some licensing changes and fees to have those separate instances. But I believe that Acumatica offers a full-time sandbox, not just a temporary sandbox that's free, but a full-time sandbox for a small fee, a few $100s, I believe. But if you're interested in that, we can check into that for you. And then Action also hosts environments. So we could also be your host for a separate environment as well. But in order to prevent all of the conflict that we've run into with having different tenants set up in the same environment, we first recommend that you isolate them and separate them into actual different environments, which is different apps, different servers, different databases. So then they're isolated. They can't affect each other's databases. The customizations can't affect each other, etc. Testing versus production, that's just another example. A frequent use of a tenant is to set up one for testing, and Acumatica recommends that a lot. We prefer not. Definitely it'll work, but you'll have to deal with the consequences and the risks of dealing with what happens with customizations that conflict, etc. Because a frequent scenario, for example, is you're live in production, but you want to make a change to a customization. For example, you want to change a feature. So that change will be made in the testing tenant so that you can test it first. Now you've got two versions of the same customization in one instance of an application. That can get messy if you don't do it right. And it can be done, but it will take additional coding to make it work. Whereas if you isolate those instances, you won't have that conflict. All right. Continuing, I'm going to talk a little bit more about multi-tenant too, because it is a very complex issue with Acumatica. So publishing. Let me go back to the screen. Publish screen. All right, so talking about publishing. Now, if you do have a single instance, single tenant, it's quite simple. To be frank, you basically select the customizations you want or don't want published, and you click publish. You don't have to worry about other tenants, whether you want that customization there or not, whether it was unpublished in another tenant, etc. You don't have to worry about those complexities. Just publish. Now, so number one, our first recommendation is to isolate your environments, so you don't worry about that. The second recommendation, if you can't do that for some reason, is to write your customizations so they are tenant independent, meaning if the tenant is live on all, sorry, if the customization is published, it doesn't matter if it's what tenant is active. So you don't have to put in tenant-specific code or changes, etc. It's tenant independent. If it's published, it goes everywhere and it doesn't matter. So that's recommendation number 2. Recommendation number 3 is, if you can't do those first 2 for some reason, and you have to do tenant-specific customizations, like I started to mention before, those customizations have to be written tenant dependent, so that the code or the low code, no code changes have to be specific to a tenant. For example, if a code extension is written, there has to be code in it that says, if it's tenant number 1 or 3, do this, else ignore it, that sort of thing. That will isolate it in code instead of environment. So those are the 3 options of best practices at a high level. Now, taking it further with publishing, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This has 5 tenants. Another best practice recommendation we have, almost a requirement, but many clients don't do this and it gets them into trouble, is we really recommend to designate a primary tenant. So if you have to have multiple tenants, choose one, say this one, to publish everything in. Even if it's for a different tenant, choose a primary tenant to publish in. Now, you may not know this, but if you publish for this tenant, for example, and then you publish to multiple tenants, say you go here and here. If you then open the training database tenant, it will not show that customization in the training database tenant, even though it is published there. That's a big confusion. So things like that about, it won't show things that are published or unpublishes things that shouldn't be unpublished, etc. Because, like I said before, if you have different customizations and you try to load them in different tenants and you publish to one tenant, the other tenant will be unpublished. And then you're sort of in a vicious cycle with, then you go to the other tenant and see that they're unpublished, so you publish them, and then it unpublishes the first one. So there's a lot of weirdness in there. So what we recommend to solve that is always choose a primary tenant. So the customizations will only be shown in that tenant, and then whenever you need to make a customization, you can redeploy them from here, from the primary.
So Tony, before you go on, I know you're really close to finishing here.
Yeah.
We have reached our time.
Okay.
I just want to let everyone know that we're going to give Tony a few more minutes here to finish these last few bullet points, and then we'll have a little wrap up and Q&A if there is any afterwards. So we'll keep going here. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Bob. Right, I forgot it was set for 45 minutes. Okay. Updates I already talked about. That's just the wanted to emphasize that when you do publish something, it's always a good idea, if you don't know if changes were made, open them up and reload. That'll give you all the recent changes. because if you go ahead and publish, you might lose those changes. Yeah, a couple other quick bullet points here. Remaining, this will be quick. Naming conventions for the customizations that we've come up with. I'll just pull those on screen. And if you've seen our customizations currently or previously, we typically give them the AKT prefix that you'll notice. From here on out, and we've already started this, we've come up with a new convention that you'll see on our own customizations. Longer, yes, but more informative, absolutely. So it'll be our name, your company name that we're writing the customization for, and that's typically your URL domain name we'll use there to be consistent. And then the purpose of the customization in a short phrase or a couple words. And then we're now including the major version of Acumatica on the end, so that when upgrading, etc., we know which version that was created for, so we can perform any necessary upgrades, and then we'll also advance that version. And so if you're creating any customizations on your own in packaging, we ask you to use this syntax, which is basically the same except without action on the front. And one more thing to mention, monitoring. A standard practice that we've started is that we have a customization that we like to put on your site that allows us to simply query what customizations you have live. That gives us a little information so that we know what's out there and what we may have to deal with for your benefit. It lets us know if what's out there, ISVs, your own packages, etc., so that we have that beneficial information moving forward. And so the plan is to put that on your site so we can run those queries periodically, and we hope to advance that customization further to help us even more monitor what's going on with changes, etc., to help you. But we'll let you know before we do any of that. And with that, I think I'm done. Open it up for questions.
Hey, Tony, thank you. Thank you so much, Tony. Great presentation. So one of the things that we wanted to kind of offer you, again, part of our effort to add value as your partner, we've got this all organized into a document. So there's a best practices document which we're going to share with everybody who attended this webinar. I mean, we felt like it's kind of a topic that has a lot of twists and turns, and we couldn't just send this out to people who want it, because I think it takes some explanation. I think introducing you to Tony and meeting him, I think, is an important part of that, of that process to make sure that that you understand, as you're getting into customizations, and we want to give you a reference document that's going to follow up with kind of these best practices. There's a summary document that's, I think it's only 2 pages, 2 or 3 pages, a relatively small document that's going to be shared with you. I think we did get a question about backups. I guess we're talking a lot about backups in separate environments and development environments and packages. I think there are options with Acumatica to have access to your database, and there's something that they call backup access services. So I think we need to talk to your sales rep and make sure that we understand what that is and see if that meets your needs. There is a fee for that. There is the ability to take a backup and restore it. I think we'd have to make sure that we understand how to do that. I think, as Tony said, we can You know, we do host environments. If you really need a separate environment to work in, I think we can provide that. And I think Tony didn't necessarily say this, and hopefully I'm not stepping out of bounds here. You know, if you're developing packages and you want to send them to us, we keep a repository, and I think it would make sense for us to have copies of things you're doing, just so we have a reference point for your next upgrade or whatever else might be needed for your account in the future.
Yep.
And with
Yep, I neglected to say that. You're right. Yeah, absolutely. If you are creating them for yourself, and we're not creating it, we can take them and put them in our repository, but we can't be responsible for the content or the versions, of course, because we didn't create.
Yeah, those things all automatically happen when we do the development work for you. But if you're doing them on your own, I guess we don't want to get caught into the example of it's time for an upgrade and there's a bunch in there that we didn't know about. We didn't know that you guys were doing these things on your own, which you're entitled to do. I mean, this is you have source code, you have access to your applications, you have training available. We just want to be part of supporting you and making sure that you're well taken care of. So with that, any other questions? Lauren, do we have any questions?
Let's see. I had one question, but it's a question I can answer. This meeting was recorded, yes, and I will be distributing that recording along with the document that Bob mentioned. So yeah, that was the one question that I could answer. So, but with that, I think we're gonna wrap it up. If that's all right with you two.
Yeah, just a final comment. This is a detailed subject. There's a lot to it. If anyone is digesting, after you review the recording of this or you review the document that we send out and you have additional questions, we're not opposed to a follow-up, a one-on-one or a follow-up webinar with a list of new questions that maybe you have that weren't addressed in this. So we feel like this is a real differentiator. It's an important aspect of Acumatica, and I think we want to make sure that we're always in sync with you as our customers to make sure that we're taking good care of you. So that's all we've got here. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thanks, guys. I will be following up with each of you and providing all that information. And if you have questions that come up, then you can certainly let me know, and I'll pass those along to Tony and Bob and whoever else needs to be involved in that. So, all right. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.